across Europe, we can be routinely collecting information on new medicines, but also medicines that are used more rarely, but also polytherapy.
Fellow Homo sapiens, do you fancy hearing about something positive? Well, in this week's Epilepsy Sparks Insights episode, we have paediatric neuropsychologist and researcher Rebecca Bromley talk to us about research and international collaborations in regards to epilepsy medicine safety, aka pharmacovigilance. Rebecca talks about improving the lives of people with an epilepsy who are of childbearing age, and of course the babies and children themselves. Rebecca also speaks of providing greater choice regarding medications for other people with an epilepsy and the joyful funding side of things, which is an ongoing challenge.
So I'm Rebecca Bromley. I'm a paediatric neuropsychologist and I work at Manchester University and also Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. And I have a bit of a split role within my post. So I work at Manchester Children's, seeing children who have epilepsy themselves as part of the complex epilepsy pathway there. But then I guess what we're going to talk about today is much more aligned to my research work, which is around medicine safety, particularly medicine safety in pregnancy. And so we do a huge number of pieces of work looking to determine which medicines we can more confidently say have lower risks and can be used much more frequently for women or people in their childbearing years, and which medications actually we would like to like for clinicians to have a more detailed conversation with women about, because their risks could be higher.
Because all we tend to hear as women or people with childbearing age is that you can't take SodiumValproate or Epilim, and good luck with everything else. And that's the overall sort of message that many of us receive anyway. Tell us how your message differs, and tell us about pharmacovigilance.
Pharmacovigilance is just basically medicine safety. And it, there are responsibilities around pharmacovigilance or medicine safety whenever a new drug gets approved. Now, what we would like to see is a much more improved medicine safety pathway for medicines, because whilst we don't have information on them and we spend decades and decades waiting for that information, actually, like you just said, people who are kind of in their childbearing years are actually advised not to take these medicines because we don't know about them. And actually, some of these medicines could be the best ones to treat the epilepsy. So yes, I think we've all definitely been busy on Valproate, and that has been depressing, like, the outcomes to do with Valproate. We can't get away from that. And actually Valproate shows us that we weren't fast enough. It is an excellent drug for certain types of epilepsy, right, but we can't get away from the fact that it has this risk profile for fetuses that are exposed. What I'd like to change is how the time it takes to learn about those, so we can then sort out which medications may be more risky, but which medications can be used with more confidence. And then women and people who are in their childbearing years can go to their doctors and can have those conversations, and the doctor can say, right, we have all this information. These are the ones that are likely to suit your epilepsy, and this is the information that we have about their relative safety kind of being used if you happened to conceive a child. And so that's kind of my aim, really, is that we really improve our pharmacovigilance around the anti-seizure medications to kind of reduce all of this difficulty that we see, which is really sort of induced by the fact that we have such a slow system at the moment. So everybody gets frustrated with the system because actually the data isn't there fast enough. And so I think we'd all feel a little bit more happy, to use a very moderate word there, if we could determine risk and benefit much faster.
So what does an improved pharmacovigilance sort of world look like?
It's a great question. So I think it has to happen on so many levels. So there are a number of ways that we can check out the safety of medicines. So we can do it with preclinical studies, so animal studies, where we can look in mammals, but also flies and other species. So look if the medication carries an increased risk there. Mm-hmm. In humans, the human research where I sit, we can kind of do a few different things. So the medicine regulators internationally and the pharmaceutical companies use what's called spontaneous reports. So when a medication is released, if there is an adverse outcome in my kind of world, it's in the child. So the parent was taking the medicine and the child has a problem, it gets reported spontaneously by the doctor to the medicine regulator or the pharmaceutical company. And that works to an extent, but better if you take a medicine yourself and within 3 days you have a rash, you go back to the person who prescribed you that medicine, that tends to get reported a lot better. Where adverse event reporting tends to fail, I think, for want of a better word, for medicines that are used in pregnancy and then the outcomes in the offspring, is you've got one person taking the medicine, you then may have a 10-year delay, and then the person who's got the outcome is the child. So it's a whole other different person. And that adds so much complexity that actually we don't see adverse event reporting working as well as maybe it should do. So that's the kind of the way that the regulators and the pharmaceutical companies do it. Then we have two main research strategies. One is where we recruit big cohorts of families where they're going through pregnancy, and then we follow the children up. And that's sort of predominantly what I've done for the last sort of 15-ish years in this, and is my favourite because I get to go out and see the families. I think, as I was messaging you, that's my favourite bit. I like to be in my car, going around the country, seeing the families. And we've got some great home visit stories over the years as well. And there we tend to follow them up from pregnancy through to as long as the money will last. So usually we like to follow up into childhood. So these families will see us maybe when their child is 1, 3 and 6. And so it actually becomes part of their child's development. And we take very careful notes and observations about how those children are developing, about their physical health. And that's how we learn about that. Then the third type of study that we have is much newer, and that's because IT services and infrastructure have moved forward, and that we can use these large population data sets of routinely collected information to, again, this is kind of looking back. So you take all the children that were born where one of their parents, maybe their mother, maybe their father was taking a medication, and look at those children's outcomes. And they're sort of fairly new over the last kind of 10 years and are going to have a real impact, I think, on how we research these. So those are the four strands. We've got our animal, and then we've sort of got three main strands within the human work as well. And there are people all over the world working on this, just not enough. And that's, again, why things are so slow.
And are you working with other bodies in other countries on this work, or is it solely in the UK?
So everything we're doing at the moment is very much focused on collaboration. And so some of my current funding is from the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is the EU pot of money. And we are working in a very big consortium called the Conception Consortium. And the task of that is to improve pregnancy pharmacovigilance, so not just for seizure medications, for any medications, improve how the animal studies and the human studies are done. It's a huge piece of work. My little part of that is to set up a way that we can learn about the neurodevelopmental and the longer term outcomes more efficiently. So we're a bit faster at learning about any risks of the child being born with an immediate health problem. So maybe a birth defect or a congenital anomaly. We're much better at that because they're observable at the point of birth and can be reported fairly easily. Where we have even less information, and which families tell us time and time again is what matters to them, is about how that child develops later on. And so that's what I'm tasked with within this big European consortium, is to improve the methodological approaches that we could use across Europe. And so what we've done is we've built something called the Lifetime Framework. And I'm really grateful. We've had kind of input from people with epilepsy, from neurologists, from obstetricians, from neuropsychologists like myself, just everybody. It's been a huge, beautiful, collaborative piece of work. And what we're doing now is we're piloting it. So we're piloting it in the UK through the UK Epilepsy and Pregnancy Register. We've got colleagues in Norway and also in the Netherlands. There's a big pharmacovigilance unit called LARAB in the Netherlands. And so we're testing this kind of framework. So it's a set way to follow up with set questionnaires, at set age points. And the idea there is if we're all doing the same thing, we can collect information about those rarer exposures much faster. So in the UK, we might have 2 exposures a year to a particular medication. Norway may have 2, LARAB may have 2, etc. But we're trying to go for the snowball effect. So a huge focus is about this international collaboration. And if we can show it works in this pilot, and we've got this safe data space where we can bring all the data together that's GDPR compliant, the idea then is if we can make this work, then across Europe, we can be routinely collecting information on new medicines, but also medicines that are used more rarely, but also polytherapy as well. Because a big thing is that we're still struggling to learn about the individual monotherapies, but the reality is lots of people in their childbearing years will need to add a second or even a third medication in. And again, lots of questions get asked from, the data. Well, what does that do in terms of risk to the developing baby? And we don't know. And so again, by having this international collaboration where we're all doing the same thing, it allows us to start answering those harder questions.
When you are talking about recording multiple different drugs or polytherapy, are you looking at solely the anti-seizure medications or also other types of drugs that a patient might be on? So many of us are on like antidepressants, for instance.
The framework that we're testing is designed to do any medications.
Okay.
And certainly our pilot site in the Netherlands, LAREB, they're just any women who sign up to their pharmacovigilance network is anyone. But actually, because of my background and my interest in the anti-seizure medications, both the UK pilot and the Norway pilot is focused on anti-seizure medications.
How long do you think until we start getting, or maybe you've gotten some sort of results already, have you? And what sort of timescale are we looking at for more results?
So the pilot will finish in about 14 months.
Okay, not long.
And that will just show us that we can, through the 3 different sites, recruit women or people who are pregnant and follow them up, and what we kind of touch base with them kind of during pregnancy, then at birth, then at 3 months, then at 6 months, then at 12 months. And so we'll show feasibility. For example, can we keep contact with the women, and also how best do we keep contact? And so again, there's a little piece of work there where we're asking the families that take part to reflect on what worked well for them, what do we need to change before we think about rolling this out. So we hope, that this is very similar to studies that we've done in the UK before. So we don't envisage this being too challenging and being something that we then abandon. We think actually it might need some tweaking, but then we should be ready to go. So then it's all about finding the right collaborators across Europe or even wider, and also finding out how to fund it. So this is the challenge. So because we have to follow children up over such a long time,
right, takes money.
Funding pots tend to be 3 years. But it tends to be 3 years. Each grant tends to be 3 years. 5, if you're lucky, you get a good grant stream. But, really, for proper surveillance for these medicines, we probably need a good 10-year pot of money. And that doesn't exist. And so we are constantly in this cycle of trying to work out how to fund this, particularly if it becomes surveillance. And I think that we'll need to broaden our horizons, really, and think about academic grant funding, but also think of other funding streams as well. Whether that be through sort of regulators or pots of money that pharmaceutical companies need to put into, because they have an obligation at point of license to do safety studies. And again, we'd really like to see an improvement in how they're done, the timelines for them being done, and also the fact that we probably need multiple types of studies being done simultaneously to get the answers a lot faster. So
if anyone wants to get involved, what should they do to contact you, whether they be clinicians, families, whatever?
So I think probably, my email address, I don't know if you can put that on the blog.
Yeah, sure, I'll put that on the website.
Yeah, or Rebecca Bromley on Twitter, so I think it's Reb Bromley, REBBROMLEY. But yeah, absolutely. And if I can't help, I can certainly find somebody within the kind of the area that can. We are a fairly small group of researchers internationally that look at this, so we sort of all tend to know each other and all tend to like working together, which is also really fab.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great to hear something positive about the situation and something productive which is going on. That's a lovely warm feeling inside. Thank you.
Thanks, Torie. Bye.
Thank you so much to Rebecca for a really positive, constructive spin on the situation regarding epilepsy medications and their impact on patients and children, emphasising the importance of both preclinical and clinical research. Oh, and the joy of sourcing funding.